Hello there. So my name is Reed. I'm the current resident apprentice here at the museum, and I'm going to do a demonstration for you of the piece that I did about 3 or 4 years ago now for the 150mm challenge show put together by Hereford College in the UK. So the measurements for the challenge work out in American measurements to about 6 inches of 3/4 square, which is what I've got right here, which is plenty of material. So the piece that I'll be doing is a copy of that piece that I did a few years ago, and it's a hand and arm sort of roughly modeled off of the work of Monica Coyne and Vivek Gottlieb, who I'd seen very recently doing demonstrations at conferences right before the challenge started, but with a slightly different take on sort of line weight and how everything gets put together, but it's very much based on the work that I saw them doing at the time. The first thing I'm going to do is isolate the material that's going to become the hand from the material that's going to be the rest of the arm. I'm going to do that here with this bottom filler. You could very much do that with the edge of the anvil. I slightly prefer to keep my edges a little bit, I don't like to have too many radiuses on my anvil, so I tend to use bottom fillers for that sort of thing. But you could also just use the edge of the anvil for that sort of thing. So use this to isolate the material for the hand, and then work sort of the forearm back a little bit, make the elbow, and then work the upper arm back. So, I'm going to give myself a little bit more than a cube of material. I'm actually going to do this on the edge. Keep back a little bit. Cool. So that gives me material for the forearm and the hand. The next thing I'm going to do is make the elbow in there. Sometimes slip off a filler like this, which is fine. Cool. So now I've got stuff that can be my forearm, my hand, and the rest of the arm. This tool, called a guillotine tool, which has a bottom and top die, just like you'd see with a hammer or a bottom die and top die and someone swinging a sledge for you, but it's great for smaller stuff because you don't need someone else here. You can just put something in there and then work onto the top die just like you would with a hammer. So I'm going to give myself just about there. And there we go. So I've got now all of my pieces isolated from each other, all of my amounts of mass for things. And this very much does leave a whole lot of material unused, which debatably was not the spirit of the challenge, but I kind of like it because I like that sense of something sort of textured and detailed and organic coming out of the undisturbed material of the original bar. So now that I've got everything isolated and all my sort of materials worked out, the next thing I'm going to do is actually start working them into something closer to that final shape that I'm looking for. I'm going to leave the hand until pretty much laxed. Cool. That's a little bit shorter, I think, than I want, so I'm gonna sort of extend that this way. So that gets that forearm, that upper arm, about dimensionally to where I want it, about the right length, about the right width and such. So next I'm going to do roughly the same thing to that forearm. I'm going to get it to closer to the right width and length and such, so it's not quite so cartoonish. Coming to either side of the back of that elbow, I can give, you know, that sense of that hard point on the end there. So, I'm going to take a little bit more of this slope. Cool. So I like that a bit more. It's got a bit more of the shapes and smoothness that I want. So, next thing is actually working on the hand. Making it spread out and giving myself room to make sort of the fingers and the thumb. So you gotta take this sort of thing pretty slow, because it's pretty easy to go too far in one direction and get a cold shut or something like that. But by flattening it out a bit and then working that over the edge, and flattening it out, working it over the edge, I can get that little push out on the pinky side of the hand and give myself more on this side of the thumb. So this is very much the tricky part. Because what I have to do is find where the end of the thumb is going to be and use that to make that depression between the thumb and the rest of the fingers. And getting that proportion right is very difficult because then the fingers are going to get a little bit longer. So what I like to do at this point is come on over to a table. And just trace this out so I can really see that in something a little bit more vague. So if that's there, that's there, that's going to grow a little bit. So I want something that's actually quite close to the end of that blob that I've got there. Partially because the fingers that I'm going to make are going to be a bit longer than normal human fingers, but that thumb should be pretty close to right on, you know, proportionally. Alright. So if we look at that, I want that thumb to be probably about there. So I'm going to line that up on the edge of my anvil. And there we go. So that gives me the end of my thumb, which I'm pretty happy with. I think that's alright. Cool. So then the next thing is how far back does that actually come on the hand. All the way back there, so barely even above the wrist, probably about halfway, a little bit, you know, more or less than halfway into our palm. So, call that our palm, that's about halfway. So then what I'm going to do next is it's not cold as such, but I'm going to not heat it up again to mark this. I'm going to take a little chisel. Cool. So with that, I have marked where that cut needs to be. Alright, so I've got my cut started pretty okay there. And I'm not going to finish this cut at the anvil, I'm actually going to finish it at the vise instead. So I've got that cut, and I'm happy with it, at least in terms of proportions and such. Most of the rest of the handwork I'm probably going to do with the torch. So that gives me that sort of cock out that a thumb has, and space to clean this up and finish that. Cool. So, at this point, I have to take a moment and file it. A little bit of a bend at the wrist. We bend the elbow. Have a nice big thumbs up. So, like a lot of people who did pieces for the 150mm challenge, I pretty much just would wire wheel this and then give it a coating of wax, which is, I believe, what I did to the original. Yeah, this is pretty much done. It has some fun forge work at the anvil, a little bit of chiseling, a little bit of filing, but I think it's a really lovely shape. I was really glad to do it, and I was really glad that they picked it for the traveling exhibition. It's a tremendous honor. Hopefully you enjoyed this, hopefully you learned some stuff, and hopefully you take some of these and make something cool of your own. Goodbye!